Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to break down the latest Rings of Power trailer. There are going to be some spoilers, so you've been warned, and with that, let's get started.
There was a time when the world was so young.
So our opening phrase is, there was a time when the world was so young. As this is happening, we see a ship sailing into Numenor with all of its grandeur, and then a close-up of Galadriel's face. Sailing into Numenor picks up where the previous trailer left off, so it is possible this is just sort of continuity or filler. However, I'm sure this marketing material was crafted very meticulously, so I'd like to think there's a little deeper meaning. A young Numenor could refer to everything that Numenor has stood for to this point, mankind's greatest achievement, all of its potential before it was corrupted by the arrogance and stupidity of man. As far as Galadriel goes, I think this is all pretty obvious. The story is going to center around her and some sort of coming-of-age story, if you will, and we also need to separate her from the Peter Jackson Galadriel that we all already know.
There had not yet been a sunrise. But even then, there was light.
There had not yet been a sunrise, but even then, there was light. We see Finrod walking across the fields of Valinor, and then a close-up of the two trees, which provided the very light the narrator was referring to. As more information has been released, the only thing that I've consistently enjoyed about this show have been the landscape visuals, and this teaser continues that. I know we've seen a lot of this before, but Numenor, Valinor, and the city of Tirion all look incredible, and I can't wait to see more.
Call to me, lands far away.
Next, we hear the song Come to Me, Lands Far Away, and we finish with what is almost certainly a shot of Lindon, Gil-galad's kingdom. As we hear the words, Come to me, lands far away, we see a group of people on what appears to be a long and treacherous journey. If the symbolism holds, then that journey ends in Lindon. In the first frame, you can't really tell who the people are, but in the second, it's pretty obvious that they are elves. For my money, this has to be the elven migration, where they traverse the northern wastes and begin to settle in the more commonly known areas of Middle-earth. I believe the first two episodes are going to concentrate substantially on the elven backstory or flashbacks, and then this would mark the end of that backstory. Again, the scenery and landscape look stunning, and these panoramic shots, if that's what they're called, are very reminiscent of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. Let's be honest, that's exactly why these shots are there. To me, the people behind this show, despite what they say publicly, are desperately trying to strike a chord between the show and the movies in an attempt to reach that fan base. They can't change some of the decisions they've already made or what they've already filmed, but being associated with the Peter Jackson films may help stop the bleeding.
Elves have forests to protect. Dwarfs their mines. Men their fields of grain.
Next, we hear elves have their forests to protect, dwarves their mines, and men their fields of grain. I don't think there's any symbolism in these words. I think this is just to set up the next sentence, which I will get to in a minute, but let's take a look at these visuals. We've already discussed Lindon, and I'm also quite pleased with this nondescript human village. There's nothing fancy about it, but this is exactly what you would expect a peasant village to look like. I don't know how this village ties into the rest of the story, but I do appreciate that they just kept it simple and didn't go overboard. Unfortunately, I think they kept some of that same mentality when it came to Khazad-dûm or Moria, and this picture is a little disappointing. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot to like here. The general aesthetic is on, the beams of light, which is a wonderful detail that they brought from the books, and the vegetation, but it's just a near miss for me. I don't know, maybe I'm underwhelmed because my expectations were so high, but this particular frame just has too much of a CGI feel for me. I don't know. Like I said, just a miss. Of course, Moria is a massive place, and they are going to have their opportunity to redeem themselves in other areas, so we'll see.
But we Harfoots have each other.
For I must now wander this wandering day.
We're safe.
Now, earlier I mentioned that the previous half of this verse didn't have a lot of symbolism, but it set up the second half. The narrator talks about what the other races hold sacred, the forests, the mines, the grain, and then when referring to the Harfoots, she says, we have each other. Then we see the Harfoots traveling together, followed by a scene of, say, community and fellowship, with them dancing in the woods, a very simple life, sending a very clear message as to what it is that they hold dear. She then says, we're safe, and we immediately transition into a meteor falling from the sky. In this context, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the meteor is either going to be their salvation or their destruction. Both of these ideas fit perfectly within the two most common theories about who the Meteor Man might be. The first theory, and the one that represents my personal opinion as well, is that the Meteor Man is a blue wizard. For those that don't know, the Blue Wizards were good guys who came down and worked to undermine the machinations of Sauron, so it's easy to see how one of them would be the salvation of the Harfoots. The second theory suggests that the Meteor Man is actually Sauron himself. This suggestion is bolstered by an image from later in the trailer where the flaming wreckage of the meteor forms an image that is suspiciously like Sauron's eye. Although I don't think it is, a small part of me actually does hope that this is indeed Sauron. If he slaughters them or even just corrupts them into low-level orcs, it would be much easier to reconcile this entire idiotic Harfoot thing with the source material than it would be otherwise. In either case, it's pretty obvious how if the Blue Wizard represents safety, Sauron represents danger.
Fought long enough, Galadriel.
Next, we have that beautiful waterfall shot that we've seen before, and then Galadriel speaking to someone else in the Northern Wastes. Now, we don't know who this other person is, but if you look at their equipment, specifically the hilt of their sword, they are identical, so we can assume that this person is an elf. I think we can also safely rule out Gil-galad, Celebrimbor, and Elrond. Also, notice the body language in the picture. It would seem to indicate that this conversation is actually a disagreement. So, a couple of pieces of wild speculation come to mind. First, we know there's going to be some shenanigans related to Galadriel's brothers that has nothing to do with what actually happened in the books. Could this be the very first scene where we begin to see a schism between her and one of her brothers? The second idea is just as fun as it is unlikely, in that this is Celeborn, Galadriel's husband. We know that he's not going to play a major role in the show, so maybe the writers use this marital spat as an excuse for him to disappear for 3,500 years. Did they have bowling alleys in Middle-earth? I don't know. In all seriousness, though, if this is one of Galadriel's brothers, then this scene could set the stage for the main storyline throughout Season 1. As we move along, we fall upon a conversation between Elrond and Galadriel. This scene is the basis of the narration in the background, where Elrond tells Galadriel to hang up your sword, it's over, and she tells him, you haven't seen what I've seen. Of course, we don't know what they're talking about in this scene, but people have had a lot to say about it, because in their mind it confirms their beliefs that Amazon is going to artificially inflate Galadriel at the expense of people like Elrond, Gil-galad, and Celebrimbor. Now, I don't know what's going on in this scene, but after Wheel of Time and some of Amazon's production policies became public, Amazon no longer gets the benefit of the doubt, and I absolutely believe that is going to happen throughout the series.
The enemy is still out there.
Next, we see that same group of elves continuing to make their way through the frozen wastes and a blizzard, and then some form of ice cave where you see the hand of the ice troll moving in the foreground. No idea why so much of this trailer is dedicated to this journey. Perhaps I'm mistaken about what it is, and there's more there than meets the eye. We'll have to wait and see. Next, we have another absolutely stunning cityscape. We don't know which city this is, but the architecture looks human to me, so I'm guessing Armenelos, the capital city of Numenor. Keep in mind all the towers that you see as we move to our next scene. And voila, we have the most compelling scene for the entire trailer. It's just one of those things that you see and you're foaming at the mouth waiting to see it in the show. So what is it? Well, I can only think of two things. It's either the aftermath of the War of Wrath, or it is the sinking of the island of Numenor. You'll notice the slight distortion and weightlessness effect. That could be an indicator that this is a dream or a flashback, which in turn could be a strong indicator that this was a memory from the War of Wrath. However, I feel the stronger evidence supports the fall of Numenor. Instead of weightlessness and distortion, this could actually be things falling into the water when the island sinks. In the background, we have Galadriel saying, "You haven't seen what I've seen." As we know, Galadriel had no part in the War of Wrath, but in the show, she will be going to Numenor. Yes, I understand both the futility and irony of saying one thing isn't happening because it's not in the books, which means the other thing is happening, even though that also is not in the books. Welcome to Rings of Power, folks. More things to support the Númenórean theory are the spear in the foreground looks more human than elven, and the tower in the center of the frame looks strikingly similar to the Númenórean towers we just spoke about a few minutes ago. Finally, the flame at the top of the tower could be symbolism for Sauron, who of course played a direct role in the sinking of Numenor. More ships and fantastic cityscapes.
Darkness will march over the face of the earth.
Now, this is a scene that gives me a lot of hope. Gil-galad saying darkness will march over the face of the earth. In the books, it was primarily Gil-galad who perceived the coming threat, yet in some of the early marketing material for the show, they had attributed that to Galadriel. This appeared to be once again a case where an important male figure was being diminished to exaggerate the female lead. However, depending on the context of the scene, it does give hope that Gil-galad is not the marginalized character that we thought he was going to be. As Gil-galad talks about darkness, we transition into another solid-looking scene of an elf or human leading a band of orcs. This scene looks like it was done with actual human extras and not CGI. When you spend the money where it counts, it shows up on the screen. Speaking of bad CGI, these birds look ridiculous. Now, this is an intriguing scene. It appears to be Tarmiriel being concerned by and taking notice of falling flower petals. I'm thinking that she's taken aback by the people showering Pharazôn with flower petals and beginning to understand just how much power he is acquiring with the people. Next, we have some Harfoots meeting a purposefully blurred out Meteor Man. We could argue all day whether or not the Meteor Man is Sauron or a blue wizard. What can't be argued is that without him, no one would care about the Harfoot storyline. Now, this Khazad-dûm looks considerably better than the previous one, but again, it's still just a little off. I don't know if it's the lighting, what it is, but it's just a little off. It still feels like CGI. Hopefully this is something they can fix in post-production to really bring this to life and make it look less artificial. Not to be forgotten, we also have Elrond visiting the dwarves. The Vanity Fair article said that Elrond was a politician, and we just saw High King Gil-galad worrying about the rising darkness. It just makes sense that this might be Elrond being sent as an emissary to strike a peace accord with the dwarves. Dwarves would certainly make powerful allies in the times to come. Then we get some more dwarf shenanigans, a good time was had by all, and some more elves climbing ice for some reason. Next is Halbrand in Numenor, no big deal, and another shot of Arendil. I'm starting to get really curious about his breastplate. It looks like it's made of wood, but that would be silly. Maybe some form of treated leather, and if that's not an Ent, I don't know what else it could be. Now we have something to talk about with Galadriel leading a charge of Númenórean cavalry. Until I have evidence to the contrary, I have to assume this is a battle between the king's men and the faithful. I have absolutely no idea why they decided to wrap Galadriel up in this storyline. Not only is it not from the books, but this story could have easily stood on its own. I'm guessing there's going to be some contrivance or some narrative that they could not have pulled off otherwise. The only other possibility I can think of is that this is early on when Sauron gets captured, and they're likely going to try and give credit to Galadriel as opposed to Ar-Pharazôn. I'm sure the scene as a whole is going to look great, but why would you put these beer-bellied LARPers with their man-boob arbor in the foreground? Man, that looks stupid. This would appear to be Isildur and the remaining faithful fleeing Numenor after being defeated. Some people have made a lot of fuss about this scene because in the background we have the narration of Isildur's father saying we have to forget the past, maybe as a veiled reference to original Tolkien or the Peter Jackson films. Although I've said I don't give Amazon the benefit of the doubt anymore, I just don't see any reason to come to this conclusion. This appears to be pretty straightforward to me, Isildur and his father arguing about what to do about the growing threat on the island. Here we have Pharazôn working the crowd, shaking hands, kissing babies, and getting people on his side. This sequence gives me a lot of hope, and here's why. In the books, Pharazôn and Tarmiriel are roughly the same age, but if we look here, look how gray Pharazôn is, how old he is. This is one of those rare examples where deviating from the source material might be a positive. As we know, Pharazôn is manipulated and driven to bad decisions based on his fear of his own mortality. The only reason I can think that Amazon would age up Pharazôn is because they want to stay true to that narrative and they know they're not going to have the screen time to tell that story from the perspective of a younger man. I say this gives me hope because in Amazon's Wheel of Time, anytime a male character had to make a tough decision that didn't work out, it was always man bad, man arrogant, man stupid. By aging up Pharazôn, it at least indicates that they may give this character the nuance he deserves. Next, we have Durin IV holding up what we assume is a chunk of mithril, saying this could be the beginning of a new era. Again, we're probably looking at symbolism or foreshadowing. Mithril brought wealth and prosperity to the dwarves as well as cooperation with the elves. On the other hand, it also inspired them to dig too greedily and too deep, and we all know how that worked out. I have no idea what this is with the possible exception of the Oath of Fëanor. The Oath of Fëanor was in the years of the trees, so this would predate the Second Age by millennia, meaning that if this is shown, it will be either in the first 10 minutes of the first episode as prologue or some form of flashback. Here we have Galadriel fighting the aforementioned Frost Troll. Not a huge fan of Warrior Galadriel, but I am trying to keep an open mind, so who knows, maybe scenes like this will change my opinion. Next, we have a very solid-looking sequence involving the Meteor Man. Not only does it look cool, but it raised eyebrows as well, as the overhead shot clearly shows the configuration of his flames looks strikingly similar to Sauron's flaming eye, which in turn immediately led to speculation that Meteor Man is Sauron. Well guys, that's it for me. Please consider hitting that like or subscribe button, and I will see you next time.